what's up? Jason here. I've been building video games for about 20 years now, and throughout that time, I've been able to start a lot of new projects. And starting a lot of new projects has really given me the opportunity to make quite a few mistakes. Today, I'm going to go over some of the biggest mistakes that I've made starting new projects and some of the biggest mistakes that I see my friends and subscribers make all of the time. So if you're interested in building new projects, you want to make a game and you want to have it be successful, make sure that you stick around for the end. I'm going to go over my number one tip right at the end, and I'm going to give you just a lot of really helpful and hopefully actionable advice that you can use to make your projects a success. We're going to start with number one, going in with no plan at all. This is what most people do, especially the first couple times they're building a game. It's what I do on occasion too when I'm just not thinking straight. Going in with no plan at all really is like you sit down at the computer, you open up the editor, you start pulling in art, you start writing up some code and just making things work. Seeing what you can build without really knowing what it is you're actually trying to get to. While it can be fun and it is kind of a blast to just sit around and just hack on stuff, it's not going to lead you to a successful project. You really need to come up with some sort of a plan for all of the systems that you want to have, all of the ways that you're going to make these things interact, and what the core gameplay loop of your game is going to be. How you plan your projects is really up to you, though. I've got stacks of these notebooks, and I've got notepad docs and Trello boards open. My new favorite, though, is Hack and Plan, which is a Trello-like system that is kind of a mix between Trello and Jira. It's free, and I like to use it, so I would recommend trying it out, or use any other thing. But whatever you do, come up with some sort of a plan. Now, the last thing I want to say about planning is that you don't have to go overboard. You don't need piles and piles of notebooks for one game before you can get started. Just get enough of a plan out there that you have an idea of what you're going to do and what order you're going to do it in. It's important so that you don't just go running down the wrong path and wasting a bunch of time. You need to make sure that you're doing things in the right order and doing the right and important things. Now I want to go on to number two. If you're guilty of this one, by the way, hit the thumbs up button for me because I know I am, and I'm hoping that I'm not the only one out there. So this is building an entire game, or starting a game at least, off of a single asset. What's happened to me in the past is I'll get into the asset store, which, as you know, is full of great, beautiful art. There's all kinds of cool stuff on there. I'll see some really neat environment, some awesome sci-fi place, or some neat fantasy dungeon. And I'll go, oh, wow, that's got really cool potential. I've got this neat idea. I want to build this game based off of this asset. Obviously, that's a terrible, terrible way to design and build your game just based off of a single asset and a quick inspiration idea. Don't do that. Grab the assets, mark the things that you like, save them off, maybe pull them into your games, but don't try to use them as the core for your game. You need to really go back to number one, come in with an actual plan, think about what you want your game to be, plan it out, and then build it. Then find the assets that match instead of going the opposite direction. In fact, I've actually got a little request. If you don't mind, just to make me not feel so terrible about this, if you've done the same mistake and you've built a game off of an asset before, or tried to, or got started with it, can you just drop a comment down below and let me know what the asset was? Thank you. That'll really help me. It'll help me feel better, and hopefully it'll help everybody else feel better too. All right, let's go on to item number three, which is really asset related as well. And that's, don't fill up your project with a ton of asset packs. It can be tempting to just grab things, pull them right into your project, and keep doing that so that you can quickly add in art, add in new features, add in new functionality extremely fast. But I would recommend that you don't do that. There's another little process that I recommend instead. In fact, I did a video where I recommended 7 things to do when you start a project, and I talk a lot about it in there. But my general recommendation is that if you want to bring assets into your actual project, dump them into a temporary project first. Take the asset pack, put it into there, and then grab out the pieces that you actually need. And this is mostly because the majority of asset packs are just kind of littered with extra things that we don't really need. Sample scripts, example scenes, assets, and art pieces that we're not actually using. And if we don't need it in our project, we shouldn't pull it into there. The fourth thing on my list tends to happen to newer Unity developers who've only been using the editor for maybe a couple months or a year or two. And that's that they assume that they need to write code for just about everything. Unity has a ton of systems built in. The package manager is just loading up with all kinds of stuff from camera controllers to advanced navigation systems. And there's a lot in there that you can already just take advantage of without having to write any code at all. So I highly recommend that before you start building any systems at all, any system that goes in your game, do a little bit of searching, do a little bit of research, and see if there's maybe a Unity system that already handles that, or maybe even an asset pack that just does that for you and will allow you to continue on with your core game. Now, of course, like I said in item number 2, don't base your entire game around an asset. So if the asset is maybe like an entire game and you're just adding things onto that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But I would definitely pull in assets that get the job done for small portions of your game that you're not ready to code right now, or you really just aren't important enough for you to code so that you can focus on the parts that really matter. And the parts that matter, by the way, are what make your game unique and getting the thing done and out there. If you don't have something that's unique and special and you don't get it out there, either one of those parts fails, the game's a failure. It's kind of, just a learning experience and nothing else. All right, let's go on to item number 5, which is very related as well. And that's to not use experimental systems that are early in alpha and early in beta stages when you're starting off a game. While it can be tempting, to just jump in and try the latest and greatest thing, it can also be a huge, huge distraction. What you'll find is that these systems that are in early stages change a lot. You'll be burning a lot of time learning systems, relearning them, and then trying to figure out how to make your game actually work instead of building out what your game is. Instead of focusing on the unique, custom, cool parts about your game, you'll be focusing on how do I make my game work with this setup, or how do I make it work with this system, or why doesn't it work in this build now? I have to roll back and now I got to debug and try to figure out what's going on. And oh, they just changed it, so now I need to refactor my entire thing again. Don't do that. Look at experimental systems when you need them or in advance, experiment with them and play with them a little bit. But don't build your entire project off of an experimental system or an experimental setup unless it's absolutely necessary. If the system is the only way that your game is going to work, then fine, it makes sense. If not, though, then I would stick with something that's solid and stable and that is going to work, where you can focus on what you need to build. And again, get the game done, get it fun, get it out and finished. All right, you made it. We're at the end. The final item, the one that I see people really just lose their games to, and that I've lost games to myself. So if you're ready for this, make sure that you've already hit that thumbs up button or subscribed or whatever it is that you were going to do. And let's go. Item number 6, polishing systems before you actually have a gameplay loop. Now, this might sound a little bit weird, like polishing systems. What does that even mean? Well, let me give you a good example of a buddy of mine who was building an RPG. He wanted to build just a large scale role playing game where you wander around, go on little adventures, kill things, pick up items, standard RPG style setup, right? So the first thing he did was, well, I want to build out a randomly generated world. So I'll start building out a random world generator. And then over the next like 3 or 6 months, spent the entire time building out a random world generator and never really a game. So instead of getting a game done, got a random world generator built. But there are assets that already do that, so it wasn't super helpful. And it really just kind of distracted from the fun part and really getting that gameplay loop done. Now, I've done this with dozens of other systems. I mean, I've spent weeks on UI elements and UI systems. I've seen it happen in MMOs. I've seen it happen in first-person shooters, all kinds of different games where people just get into this mindset and they get kind of deep into one specific aspect of a game, and they focus so heavily on that they don't think about the rest of the gameplay loop. They're like, this part is really cool. This thing is really cool. This thing's really great. Let's make it better. Let's make it better. Let's make it better. And just making that one little thing better that really doesn't matter because it's not a core piece of the game, or it's just a tiny little piece of the game. So my recommendation here, and the biggest recommendation that I have, is get your core gameplay loop working first. Before you build out anything else, get the loop of your game working. Is that you go out and you collect items, you return them and do some weird quests? Is it some killing system where you're like going out on these missions, you do missions, you build up points and other things that you're spending for something? Whatever the core loop is, build that first and then expand upon that. Because without that core loop, you don't really have a game. You just have a bunch of assets and an idea. Well, I hope these were helpful for you. If you've got some other things that you recommend people don't do, please drop them down in a comment. I read them and I think that, I get great ideas from them and great suggestions. And I also recommend everybody else just go down there, look for things that other people are recommending to not do. And if you're curious about things that I recommend that you should do, make sure that you check out the video that's linked below. And I guess I'll see you next time. Thanks again, everybody. Goodbye.